Critics acting as a moral compass, public outcry, and a movie that threatens to tear the fabric of society to shreds. We're not talking about Taxi Driver, A Clockwork Orange, Natural Born Killers, American Psycho, Psycho, Reservoir Dogs, or Silence of the Lambs. This is Joker. Joker is a 2019 genre-defying comic book film directed by Todd Phillips. Yes, this Todd Phillips. You know Todd Phillips from Old School, Road Trip, War Dogs, and The Hangover. The screenplay was written by Todd Phillips and Scott Silver. Silver is the same guy who wrote The Fighter, 8 Mile, and The Finest Hours. The film is scored by Hildur Guðnadóttir, who also did the music for Chernobyl, Sicario 2, and Djinn. Jeff Groth cut the film. He also cut War Dogs, Religulous, and Project X. Director of photography is Lawrence Sher, who also made Godzilla King of Monsters, War Dogs, and I Love You Man. So as you can see, the talent behind the camera is phenomenal. But what about the talent in front of the camera? Of course, the film stars Joaquin Phoenix as the titular Joker. You also have Zazie Beetz, Francis Conroy, and Robert De Niro in supporting roles. So Joker is a character study on a guy who has a lot of issues and is trying to be a stand-up comedian. But honestly, when's the last time you met a stand-up comedian who didn't have some sort of issues? And on the side, he works as a clown to support himself and his ailing mother. So it's a pretty simple premise that tackles a lot of deep subjects. But were they able to execute them smoothly? First off, if you're watching this movie in the GCC, hold on to the end of the review and I'll tell you how many cuts there were and whether or not you should spend your money on this movie. Let me thank Store974 for the ticket. Without them, I wouldn't have been invited to the premiere because I tend not to pull punches with my reviews and people are afraid to have me come to their theaters because of that. So thank you Store974, the first and best computer gaming company in the country. They actually built my gaming rig and it is a beast. So there's a lot of controversy surrounding this movie. I have not seen this much public outcry since The Passion of the Christ. You've got people from every demographic really going up against this movie, whether it be on blogs or websites or Twitter or whatever. Everyone is trying to knock this film down. And that's why I mentioned all of those movies in my intro, because there was a huge public outcry because people feared that they would cause some sort of issue in society. And like those films, most of the people doing the outcry this time haven't even seen the movie yet. So I gotta say, if you're someone who is against a certain film or TV show or game or book, if you haven't actually experienced it, you cannot rightfully talk about it. You have no ethical or moral ground to stand on if you speak out against something and you haven't experienced it yourself. That's just you putting on a false facade and trying to tell everybody, look at me, look how morally strong I am. You should really pay attention to me. And I gotta say, movie critics, you're not a moral compass. You're someone who watches movies and you talk about the good and the bad of those films. You don't have to be a litmus test for what society thinks. Just watch the movie and talk about it on its merits. That's it. It's almost as if they're worried about what the public will have to say and not what the film has to say. And if that is your stance, if you are a movie critic, you should stop doing what you do right now because you are not a true movie critic, you are a shill. But that's enough about the outcry against this film by people who really shouldn't be talking about it. So as you guys know, when I talk about movies, I talk about the good and the bad. That being said, let's start with the good. This film is a rock-solid character study on somebody who has to deal with certain issues in society and the difficulties they might face because of it. And because it's so realistic in its portrayal and everything is done in a very matter-of-fact way, a lot of people can't handle that. But that's always the case with this type of media. These days, anytime something is challenging and realistic, people tend to try to push it away and they don't want to deal with it. They just want to put on those rose-tinted glasses and see everything as pretty and safe and idealistic. But guess what? That's not how the world is. That's definitely not how people are. The treatment of this movie reminds me of the new Call of Duty game that's coming out. You know, a lot of people are already fighting it and they don't want their kids to play it. Their kids shouldn't be playing it anyway. It's a game for mature audiences. Take Fortnite, for instance. You have a game that hundreds of millions of people are letting their kids play. They're okay with it. It's okay for your kids to go around and murder 99 other people on an island as long as they're dressed like a tomato or a unicorn and they get to do funny dances over their foe's dead body as prizes explode out of it. But when you swap out that unicorn outfit for a military uniform, you get rid of the dancing and you replace those prizes exploding from their body with blood and brains, all of a sudden then, oh, my kid can't be playing this. And that's basically what's happening to this movie. It does everything in a very realistic manner, and people can't handle that. Where was the outcry for the John Wick franchise? Hundreds of people being murdered, but it's in a stylistic and fun way, so that's okay. Where was the outcry against Hustlers? You have a bunch of strippers who use violent acts to take money from people. There has been no outcry against Hustlers. Actually, it's been praised for its strong female leads and complicated relationships, and that's fine because that's what they're trying to do, so they accomplish it. But what's with the double standard there? Movies, shows, and games are not the cause of violence. It pretty much boils down to a person with issues and their reaction to society and maybe their familial background. You can point to anything being a catalyst for what they do. But that's a very shallow, surface level examination of these issues. So having this film take a deep dive into what might cause a person to be this way is something very different, and I think it is refreshing. Some people may not be able to connect to this film because they probably had a great life growing up. You know, their family, their friends, the place where they live, it's all ideal. I myself had such a very similar upbringing to what Arthur Fleck had, I couldn't help but identify with this film. Me identifying with it doesn't change how I looked at the movie as a film, of course. But it did affect how I view Joaquin Phoenix's performance of Arthur and all of the things he goes through, because I experienced many of them. I was abused physically, I was abused mentally, I was abused sexually, my parents abandoned me, left me on my own in foster families, and I had to deal with all of these things. I was even admitted to a youth residency program for 1 year at a place called Cumberland Hall. They basically help troubled and at-risk youth sort out their issues and become a functioning member of society. Because I gotta be honest, from about 14 to 17, I was a pretty violent kid because of the things that I dealt with growing up. I didn't know how to deal with things. I didn't know how to function in society properly. I didn't know how to decompress, any of that stuff. There were times where somebody would look at me a certain way, I would get so angry, I would walk up to them and I would headbutt them. I got into a lot of trouble, but I had help. Now, in the movie, obviously, Arthur Fleck has all of these different issues, and he is being helped by a program in the city. Between the treatment that he's getting and the medication, it helps him stay at a somewhat even keel. When that funding stops, everything kind of goes out the window, and he's trying to deal with his stuff all on his own, and he can't. A lot of the issues that he has in this movie are very real, and I actually saw them in action when I was in that residency program for kids. The first thing people notice about Arthur and talk about is his pathological laughter. That's a very real condition that I actually knew someone who had it. It's called pseudobulbar affect, and it doesn't just make you laugh, it makes you have all kinds of emotions at the wrong time. So sometimes when you're supposed to be happy, you're crying. Sometimes when you're supposed to be sad, you're angry. There's all kinds of things that it can do to you. And it happens with people who have MS or Parkinson's or head trauma. It even happens to people who've had strokes. And I gotta say that his portrayal in this movie of that affect is very much spot on. It is exactly what it looks like, what it sounds like, you know, when he does the little gags and stuff because it's really messing with his throat and all that. That's all spot on. He also has post-traumatic stress, which is something that I have been dealing with for a long time because of things that I saw in the military and because of the physical and mental and sexual abuse I suffered as a kid. But because I've dealt with the things in my past, I had support, and I have no problem talking about them now. My post-traumatic stress isn't nearly what it used to be. Everybody should know it's okay to talk about these sort of things so that you can get help as well. A lot of people are saying that he's a psychopath or a sociopath, but that's not the case. While some of the Joker's portrayals in previous films and comics do have him as a psychopath or sociopath, that is not the case in this film. Not only that, those aren't actually classified as mental disorders. But that part aside, he knows what's right and wrong in this film. He has an emotional core. He does care about certain things and certain people. It's only after he's been wrong that things change with him and how he views society. In the real world, people who suffer from mental illnesses are statistically far less likely to commit acts of violence against other people, but they're far more likely to be exploited or victimized by your average Joe Schmo. And that brings us to Arthur Fleck. He has a lot of these things going on, but he is actually pretty peaceful. He kind of does his own thing. He minds his own business. He takes care of his mother, and people keep messing with him. They keep hurting him. They keep doing things wrong to him. And these are things that he doesn't deserve. These are things that society is just heaping upon him, and it's not right. So when you take his pre-existing conditions, a lack of treatment, all of these people in society wronging him, and then you add to that the trauma of a really messed up childhood and post-traumatic stress, you get the powder keg that is the Joker. A lot of people are saying that this isn't a realistic portrayal, it's not nuanced and that kind of thing. It's one of the most nuanced performances of mental illness that you're ever going to see in a film, to be honest. So like I said, I could have been Arthur Fleck, but I had all of the support and help and I got treatment, and it made me the complete antithesis of the person that I was at the time. I ended up going on to be a firefighter and a paramedic and helping with like nonprofits, doing all this stuff to help people, and I still do that. So now I'm a somewhat normal person who functions pretty well in society because I got help. Alright, so I know so far this has been a fairly deep analysis on this film and the issues that are surrounding it, but now I want to get more into just the stuff that I liked about the movie. The opening shot is of Arthur doing his face paint. He's a clown, he's supposed to be happy, but you see a tear go down his face, and you know he has issues right away. It's a great way to open the film, and it introduces you to Arthur and what he might have going on inside straight away. The next character you're introduced to in this movie is Gotham, aka New York City. This is late 70s, early 80s New York. You can see it, you can feel it, you can smell it. It is part of the movie. It's its own character. As you see Arthur navigating Gotham, you hear all of these sound effects and people talking in the background and people yelling. A lot of different things. So the sound design in this movie is very effective. It makes you feel like you're in that city right alongside of him. The cinematography in this film is gorgeous. You know, you have these dynamic camera movements, you know, they're all motivated. You have this fantastic lighting. You have all of these really great punch-ins that show details when you need to see them. You have all of these wide shots that show the environment and Arthur's interactions with them. And it shows you that he's kind of in his own world, even in the middle of this bustling city. And the same goes for the editing. I didn't see one rough cut in this film. It all blends together seamlessly. It is fantastic. The pacing is rock solid from start to finish. You have, you know, somewhat normal Arthur all the way up until he becomes the Joker, and it builds and it hits this climax. You know, it's this huge crescendo, and the music that accompanies it also is flawless. This is one of my favorite scores that I've seen in a film in a very long time. Now that's partly because I have such an affinity for the cello. It can sound really dark and brooding, it can be bright and beautiful. It's really diverse in what it can do, because you do have some positive moments in this movie right along with the negative ones, and the score reflects that. The production design is also great. All of the places that Arthur goes into look run down, they look lived in, they looked real, they look gritty, kind of like New York did in that time period. I remember growing up and seeing all of these images on TV and stuff of all these pretty raunchy, horrible places in New York City, including Times Square, until Giuliani took over and kind of Disney-fied it. Joaquin Phoenix's performance is a tour de force. This is one of the best performances I've ever seen. I'm gonna go ahead and say it's better than Heath Ledger's, but it's completely different, so that comparison's not really fair. But of course, everyone's going to be doing comparisons of the Joker, so for me, it goes Joaquin Phoenix, Heath Ledger, Mark Hamill, Cesar Romero, Jack Nicholson, and then Jared Leto. He just gives this really haunting performance. You feel his pain. It is very emotional. It's very nuanced. There's so much going on here, from his movements to his facial expressions to the sounds he makes, the laughter, the way he talks, even the stuff that he did to get himself for the shape that he's in the movie. But Joaquin Phoenix is one of those rare actors who you can really see as a different person, like You Were Never Really Here or Her or The Master. I never saw Joaquin Phoenix in those movies. I saw the characters he was playing, and that was it. The mother-son relationship in this movie is very complicated. It's very weird. It was pretty reminiscent of You Were Never Really Here. I think the one in You Were Never Really Here was much better. It was much stronger. And of course, you didn't have a lot of the issues in that film that he has with his mother in this one. And because of a lot of the stuff that he dealt with growing up, he has these issues that I talked about earlier, and they don't gloss over them at all. They put them right out there for everybody to see, and that's how it should be, because we need more realistic portrayals of people who have these issues. Is it a perfect portrayal of these issues? Of course not, but it's as close as we're gonna get pretty much in Hollywood. But because of his issues and the things that he deals with in the real world and the world itself, the film has kind of a surreal, dreamlike quality to it, so much so that there were certain times where something was happening and I was wondering, like, is he seeing this? Is this real? And that speaks to the pretty spectacular writing and world building of this movie. Following a very surprising, surreal moment, he takes this kind of break and he goes into this place by himself. It's in the middle of the film, and it's one of my favorite moments in cinema that I've ever had. It's just really beautiful. It's haunting. It makes you think. It really gives you time to think, and that's something I want to applaud this movie for. It doesn't speed through stuff, it doesn't rush through things. It gives it time to breathe, and it gives you time to take it in and think about it. And that's something that a film that tackles complicated issues like this should do. The moment preceding that, when he does kind of snap, it's well earned, it's well deserved. You know, you feel like he is justified in what he does. And I think, again, that's good writing. And when he does snap, the violence is just awesome. The violence in this movie is gorgeous. It is real. It is not done with any kind of style to it. I mean, it looks great. It's just matter of fact. So when you see people talking about how violent this movie is and how gratuitous, they are full of shit. This movie is not that violent. There's only like 3 moments of violence in this film, and all these other movies that have all this violence, people are saying, yay, great movies, because they're stylish, where this is realistic and people can't handle that, like I said. Now, Phillips and Silver did say that this was going to be a new, unique take on the Joker. They weren't going to use a bunch of the pre-existing lore as part of his origin. They were going to do their own thing, and they very much did that. Yes, it's influenced by like Taxi Driver and The King of Comedy and a bunch of other films, but at the same time, they do bring in a bunch of the lore from the Batman universe, and they do it in a very interesting and unique way. I was pleasantly surprised by it. A lot of people were actually in the audience. When certain things happen, you could hear like audible gasps. Could Joker have stood alone as a film without referencing anything in the Batman universe? Yes, it could have. I think it was kind of cool. A lot of people didn't like it, but I loved it. There are a few twists in the movie. Some people will see them coming, some people won't. But no matter what, they always do something to kind of subvert them afterwards, and I thought that was pretty cool too. To me, this movie feels like an old school film. They did it on a much lower budget than all of the other superhero movies. I think they made it for like $55 million. You don't see any CGI. The intro and outro title cards have a very old Hollywood look. It's very much an art house film. It has a story, it's character driven, it has a soul, it has something to say, it is serious. This is the type of movie I started filmmaking for. This is the type of movie that keeps me going back to theaters even when the theater going experience can be disappointing sometimes. This is bar none the best comic book film ever made. Nothing else can touch this. The closest thing that I can think of is A History of Violence. Yes, that is a comic book movie as well. A lot of people don't know that. Not only is this the best comic book film I've ever seen, it is one of the best films I've ever seen. It is realistic, it is unflinching. When there are moments that you really want to see a certain payoff, you want that catharsis, you get it. A lot of films pull away and they don't give that to you because they're afraid of what people will say or what society will feel or the outcry that will be there, against the film. This movie doesn't pull punches, and I love it for that. So with all that good out of the way, let's talk about the bad. Honestly, there's nothing bad about this film. The film itself, the execution of it, its merits, it is flawless. It is a masterpiece. The only thing that someone could say negative about this film is stuff that they feel, not about the movie itself. It's about what certain things that happen in the movie make them feel. That's it. Now, I know a lot of you from the GCC are watching this to find out if there are any cuts, if there is any censorship, if the movie is ruined by the hack censors that we have to deal with so many other films of this nature. And I'm actually very happy and quite shocked to say that this film is almost completely untouched by censors. There were 2 small cuts, both of which were kissing scenes, and they were very brief, so you don't lose anything from the film. As a matter of fact, the thing that happens in the second cut is revealed later when they pull back to a different scene. You can see what happened, so you don't even lose that one. So for once, kudos to the people in power who actually let the artistic vision of Phillips, Silver, and Phoenix stand. This is how the movie was intended to be seen, and that is amazing. So with all that being said, what is my score? Drum roll, please. 10 out of 10.